Let's turn the clock back a couple of years, and you might remember that we had a look at these, the Audeze Mobius headphones for music production. Now, these were a 7.1 3D head tracking model that predominantly transferred its data over the USB-C connection. Today, we're going to look at something that on the surface looks incredibly similar, but actually it's a complete and utter redesign. So these are Penrose. They're still planar magnetic, so they've got that fantastic transient detail. But although they're designed for console gamers, and this is the PlayStation Blue Penrose version, it shares a lot of qualities that would be ideal in the production world. Firstly, it's cut the cord, so you now get a little wireless dongle, and they have a lossless connection from the computer to the headphones. That connection is also low latency. Two qualities there that are absolutely key to modern in-the-box music production. But how well do they stack up in the studio world? Well, you're just going to have to watch the rest of this video and find out. So the first thing to note here is that Mobius and Penrose look and feel pretty much identical, and physically it's the same and the controls and connections are the same, but they do slightly different things. You've got headset volume, you've got microphone volume, you've then got the analog input on a 3.5mm TRRS jack. You've got USB-C, although on here it's only used for charging and connecting up to the Audeze HQ app on the computer. You've then got a keyed microphone input, and you get a brand new microphone in the box with it. This is a boom mic made by the people at Shure, and it's got the little Audeze logo on the back, and at the front you can see it's got the grill. You also get the windshield in with it. Next up to that, you have the little selector switch, and instead of turning 3D on and off as it did on Mobius, this swaps between the different modes. And you've got wireless, you've got Bluetooth. It uses the AAC codec, so it'll work on both Apple and Android devices. And of course, it will swap to the analog input. There's no 3D audio going on here like you've got with Mobius. It's a pure 2-channel unit, and that's predominantly because Sony in the PS5 have implemented a brand new object-based audio engine similar to Atmos, but it does all the positional rendering itself, and then all you need to do is connect a binaural headset, so a 2-channel headset, up to get the full effect of it. Now, that's great because 2 channels over Wi-Fi or wireless, so to speak, it won't use your existing network and tag into it. It will use its own one generated from this Wi-Fi dongle. And it's particularly good because it's all the things that Bluetooth audio isn't. So it's low latency and it's lossless. Now, of course, this video is not about gaming and it's not about listening with these. It's about music production. For production, Mobius did have some issues, which actually this solves most of them. Firstly, 44.1K sample rate. Mobius only worked at 48 and 96K. Unfortunately, most of the production world still works at 44.1, kind of like a hangover from the CD era. And it wasn't so bad for broadcast because that's all at 48K. But if you started something at 48K, you were fine. But if you were, say, collaborating with someone else and you were working on a 44.1K project, it wouldn't work. This has no problem. It works at both 44 and 48K and at 24-bit. So that's probably 95% of people in music production who it is suitable for. Secondly, the analog input on Mobius was a little bit too quiet, and it was it just rolled off in that top end. You just lost some of that treble detail. With this, I think it's a new ADC chip because I don't really get that. It's clear, it's crisp, and you get the benefit of the fact that it's got DSP built in. Because it's a closed back model, you're always fighting in the design stage with the reflections off the back of the cup and the internal resonances and trying to get an even frequency response. And realistically, you can only do that on a closed back with DSP. The fact is, this has it built in and it works on both the USB input and on the analog input, and with no extra perceivable latency. So that's great because you don't need something like Sonar works. That's just a fantastic thing to have. Fairly even sound with no sort of latency penalty. Next, the cable connection on Mobius, with it being USB-C and not lockable. Sometimes you could easily pull this out and knock it and it'd disconnect. Well, obviously if it's wireless, you haven't got that problem. What I will say is that because of that DSP, it's got a great frequency response. I would actually put it that out of the box, just plugging it in, it's better than pretty much most, certainly closed back headphones at this price point. You've kind of got to go up to focal stelia type levels to get something that's got a really good, well balanced frequency response in a closed back without having to do some extra EQing. Thankfully, this is pretty good. I don't think it's quite as even as Mobius, and we'll see that in a second on the frequency response charts. But you do get a EQ application as part of Audeze EQ with a number of presets this time. So I've managed to do a preset that evens it back out, and again it does all of that in the headphones. So this really is a pick up and play system. The soundstage, although it's not massively expansive, sounds like monitors, and I think this may be its little sort of niche that you really can just pick it up. It sounds like monitors, it's got a lovely bottom end response, and you can just work with it. So let's have a look at the frequency response here. Here's my chart, and to give you an idea on this, a good set of open backs will be a straight line. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that it's horizontally straight, but it's going to be even in the same way that you get a house curve on a recording studio. Only many mastering suites are truly flat. You tend to get a tilt up in the sub bass region and a little bit lower in the treble. Now with closed back headphones, the target curve on my system, which is based around mini DSP ears, is more like this slightly bent curve. So it's more flatter along the higher frequencies and ramping up at the sub bass end. If we compare, so let's put the open back target on, let's just show you something like the Audeze LCD2 or the headphones measures on this system. You can see roughly we're tracking somewhere around that line. But with closed back pairs, because you're always compensating for the reflection off the back of the cup and the internal resonances inside the headphone itself, it's a lot more difficult. So even corrected models like Stephen Slate's VSX aren't particularly flat. And if I look at also one of my favourite closed back headphones, this is the Dan Clark Audio Eon 2. On all the instructions that I've given you for use of this, it's always turn down the area around 100 hertz and below, boost up a bit at 200, and then boost up this area between 3 and 4K. This is how to sort of deal with it. Mobius was actually tonally really well balanced, and it was. This is the default setting out of Mobius, and it matches my sort of target curve pretty closely. You see, you do get this dip here. I think this is down to the actual geometry of the cups and the placement, because if I now put Penrose over the top, you'll see it's not quite as even, but it does share that same characteristic dip here between sort of 5 and 7K. I know that mini DSP ears isn't completely accurate at that frequency due to the anatomy of its ear canal, making things different to how they should be. But for the rest of the frequencies, actually, it's fairly good. And this isn't a horrendous graph. If I turn off Mobius, let's compare this to some of the most popular closed-back models. So Neumann's NDH20. You can see there, we've got, you know, a rough tracking here, sort of down, but realistically, this area is far too low, that's far too high. It sounds like it has got a bit of a scoop middle to it. Even Mackie MC350 does fairly well all throughout the lower region and the mids, but the treble is particularly high. One of the ones that keeps getting mentioned to me when I do close-back videos is that, in fact, one person told me that it was categorically much better than the Dan Clark Audio Eon 2, is the Austrian Audio X55. Yeah, that's a mountain range and a half, really, isn't it? It's a very hard thing to deal with, certainly in the analog domain. So having Penrose like this is really rather good off the bat. You know, compare that to the Slate VSX, you're not a million miles off, certainly. And because you can tweak the EQ settings on an Android phone or a PC, I've managed to tweak that down and make it a lot closer to our sort of ideal curve. It's a bit brighter in the top end, and perhaps because I'm over 40, I seem to prefer that with a bit of hi-hat positioning, and that's quite common in closed-back designs. The fact that we can't really do anything with this dip makes me think that it is something to do with the hardware geometry of the device. Also, not worrying too much about it dropping off at the bottom end here, because that's definitely in our sort of couple of dB, right down to what, 34 hertz or so. And if you're writing popular music and even dance music, dropping below that point is something that you really try and not do, because there's not many sound systems that can actually play it back, apart from, you know, the main room at Fabric or something. Actually, this works out really well. And again, this is Stephen Slate's VSX after I've put the correction on. This is the HD mode for enhanced monitoring. So you can see, actually, it shapes up really well. There's nothing else that you need to do. You don't need to put any other kind of plug-in on. It will give you tonal balance. And I mean, let's stick the LCD 2 back on. This is actually the aluminium LCD 2 that I've got here, albeit with the latest drivers. And it's particularly fairly decent, really. Of course, what makes Penrose so intriguing for music production is the fact that its wireless connection is low latency. But how low does it go? Well, fairly low if you're on a Mac. It works down to a 32 sample buffer, and it's 3.6 milliseconds of output latency. This raises to 8.4 milliseconds at 256 samples. And even if we compare that to the RME Babyface Pro, which is one of the best USB interfaces on the market, that goes from 2.4 milliseconds up to 6.7 at 256. Now, the real magic number here is 10 milliseconds. And if we can go under 10 milliseconds, if you're playing something in off the keyboard and triggering a virtual instrument, you'll be able to do that without a perceivable latency. So very important that we stick under 10. Over on Windows, it's not quite as good a story because there isn't an official ASIO driver. However, ASIO for All works really well. I've managed to get down to 6.3 milliseconds of output latency at a 64 sample buffer, and that goes up to 10.3 at 256. One of the added advantages of ASIO for All is actually you've got more play with the buffer sizes. So if you go to say 192, that clocks in about 9 milliseconds and it's in that acceptable level. So it's very much a contender and easily on par with most, sub £500 USB audio interfaces from major manufacturers. This was going to be the point where I said that the Audeze HQ app wasn't available on the Mac. It was only for Windows PCs. However, the beta version has been released yesterday and you can now go in, select Penrose, have access to the EQ, the presets, also turn the side tone on and off so you can hear yourself if you're using the microphone, and handily change the auto shutdown timer. This was a pain, especially in Logic, because it would power down after 10 minutes to save battery life, but that meant that Logic had to reload the entire project again, and that always took quite a while. Now you can just turn that up to an hour, 2 hours, or turn it off even. The only thing that this can't yet do, because it is the beta, is update the firmware, but that can be done in the final release on the Mac. It is scheduled to happen. Now, let's talk about some of the little downsides to Penrose. Firstly, the firmware as it stands, the first batch of Penrose was unfortunately on a very, very early firmware and does need to be updated. There's a couple of bugs that got fixed very quickly with the first firmware update. If you haven't got access to a PC, but you would like a unit that is already upgraded, we can do that for you if you buy directly off us. So please hit us up, scanproaudio@scan.co.uk, and we can help you with a pre-flashed unit. Secondly, the wireless range isn't the best that I've had off a wireless headset. However, it's great if you have line of sight to the controller and you're within about 6 to 10 feet of the receiver. The next limitation is the microphone quality. Unfortunately, it's not amazing over the wireless connection, but it's great over the 3.5mm analog jack. You can absolutely use it for calls, you can use it for some communication, but if you think you're going to record some YouTube channel videos with it or something, then it's really not up to that. And that's a limitation of the feed going back into the computer and the fact that they prioritize the bandwidth for the audio coming to the headphones rather than going from the headphones to the computer. However, it is an absolute steal for how good a closed back headphone can be, how even, how balanced. The soundstage is very much like monitor speakers. It's not massively wide, it's not like a HD 800, it's certainly not like the headphones, but it is very, very reminiscent of a set of monitors. So if you just want to put the headphones on, use the little EQ profile that I gave you earlier, you've got something that's way ahead of any other headphones without using any other correction software. And it's pretty reliable. I've got 2 units here. They measured almost identically on the head. So the production process seems to be very tight. So when we are looking at how this is affected, and of course, if you buy one set of a certain headphone and you buy a stock profile from something like SonarWorks, there's always a level of variability. This seems to be fairly limited. The 2 models we got measured almost identically. And that's a great thing to see because the production process is tight and you know that you're going to be getting lovely, even sound coming through. And of course, that's going to give you better balanced mixes, which is what we're trying to achieve. So let's round it up. Would I recommend these for music production? Well, if you're predominantly working just with a laptop or like an iMac or an all-in-one, and you haven't got lots of outboard equipment, then absolutely, this is great. The reliability and the even frequency response is above every other closed back headphone that you can get without having to go and put SonarWorks on. And it's, to be fair, it's on par easily with most closed back, closed back models of a similar price. For what you would get, but you haven't got to worry about anything. The latency is really low, and you can just concentrate on making some great music and mixing it well. Give this to your mastering engineer and they will love you, compared to doing a mix in a bedroom with some mild treatment on. You're going to get far better results doing your final balancing in here than you will on any other closed back system. Are there other open backs that may be more suitable? Well, not that have got DSP in, not that are just plug and play. Absolutely not. You always have got to tweak stuff in. The fact that this has got it just built in, you can stick them on, you can get working, you've got a lovely balanced tonal characteristic. I think is absolutely worth the money. It won't suit everyone's way of working, although the analog input on these, although it doesn't go quite as loud, it's still really detailed and it's better than the one on Mobius. The top end clarity to it, the ADC chip has definitely had an improvement. If you're feeding this off a mid-level interface, then it's absolutely up to the level of that interface. What more can I say? You should really try this out if you are looking for a portable mixdown solution. Any other questions about using Penrose for mixing, please leave us a comment. Anything else about headphone monitoring, hit us up, scanproaudio@scan.co.uk, and we'll get back to you. Otherwise, we'll see you for another video again soon. Thanks a lot for watching.